Hi there. My name is Jeff Friedman, and this is my podcast, Real Estate with Jeff. As I've probably told you before, I'm a real estate attorney in Atlanta. I'm a former top producing real estate agent. I've been a closing attorney, but now I'm a real estate attorney, and this is podcast number 1, and I'm really excited about it. Really excited to talk to you about real estate. And forgive me, I'd like to be very conversational in my style, and I hope that's okay, but I know you're going to get something out of this. So today I want to talk about, obviously, broadly real estate, but specifically I want to talk to you about some seismic changes in the real estate agent community that are happening. And they're very important, and what you don't know can cost you money. So that's what we're going to talk about today. There's going to be a little review, and plus we're going to talk about some things that you may not know, but let's get going. So while I'm actually excited to tell you about a fresh, new, and disruptive company called Agent Free and my involvement with that company, I think it's important to lay some groundwork for that discussion by talking about the major paradigm shift that's occurring in the residential real estate industry. But before that, let's talk about the value that real estate agents bring to buyers and sellers. You know, as I said, I'm a former top producing real estate agent, but I'm speaking to you today without bias because I'm currently a practicing real estate attorney, and I'm going to tell you like I see it. So let's just cut to the chase. Do you need a real estate agent if you're selling your house? Probably. Do you need a real estate agent if you're buying a house? Probably not. Tell you more about that. On the sell side, there's likely more work for the agent to do when they're listing a house. For example, this is just a broad view of it, prepping the house for sale. Lots of stuff involved with that. Pricing considerations, what to price it at, what's the market like, market considerations, where the market is, where the house is, and all the other stuff. The establishment and execution of a marketing plan is actually a big deal, and agents really know how to do that. Obviously, the coordination of the hosting of the physical tours of the property, the administration of contracts once they are in place. On the other hand, on the buy side, there's still plenty to do, like advising the buyer on being in a position to buy, having their financing together. Pricing considerations are important on the buy side too. Coordination of logistics of moving, because remember, your buyer might also be selling. So that may affect kind of when they can make their move and make their purchase. Completing the forms, and we're going to talk more about forms in a little bit, to make an offer, and administering the form contract once it's in place and fully binding. Assistance with buyer due diligence, and a good agent can really help a buyer in sourcing contacts and resources for their due diligence. But let's face it, most of the things that have to be done on the sell side are much more difficult for sellers to do by themselves. So an agent really is needed on the sell side. In most cases, we're going to come back to that. Certainly the seller's smart enough to handle it all, but they generally lack the resources to do these things effectively and efficiently. Furthermore, most sellers cannot objectively assess the marketability of their home. Stated differently, nobody thinks their baby is ugly, if you know what I mean. On the buy side, on the other hand, most everything that needs to be done on the buy side can be done by the buyer efficiently, and can be done online. Most people find their homes online. Furthermore, once they find the house that they want to buy, buyers can easily get it under contract and do their own due diligence. So the bottom line on agents is that the good ones bring extraordinary value to their clients who are buying or selling. And sellers and certain buyers, for example, first-time home buyers or people relocating, really always should consider using an agent. That being said, the way people buy and sell homes, at least in the state of Georgia, has gotten quite messy and confusing. While it's trying to self-correct, the process is slow and painful for all of us. And this is why I'm talking to you right now, because what you don't know can cost you. Okay, let's do a quick review of how real estate transaction in the state of Georgia is structured. And forgive me, as I know you probably already know this, but I think it's important to go over this again because it lays the groundwork for some of the messiness that we're dealing with right now. Representation, who represents who? The seller is represented by and is the client of the listing agent. Okay? The buyer is represented by and is the client of the buyer's agent. Confusingly, the buyer's agent's also called the selling agent. Doesn't make much sense, but it is. What I'm about to say is not the law. It is just how it's always customarily been done. And compensation in a real estate transaction is always negotiable. Okay. The total commission amount in a residential real estate transaction in the state of Georgia has customarily been 6%. Who customarily pays this? Well, currently it's the seller. Who does the seller pay? The seller actually doesn't pay the buyer's agent. The seller pays the listing agent, and the listing agent shares their commission, generally half and half, with the buyer's agent. That shared commission amount is called the co-op commission or cooperative commission. We'll come back to that. But what we don't have, alignment of compensation and representation, meaning proper alignment of compensation and representation would be the seller pays their agent to represent them. The buyer pays their agent to represent them. That's simple alignment of compensation and representation. We don't have that now, and it can cause problems. Let me ask you this. What if there is no buyer's agent and the seller's agreed to pay the listing agent 6%? Well, guess what? You guessed it. The listing agent contractually can keep the whole 6%. Okay. In my experience as an agent, I never forced a seller to pay me the full 6% in that circumstance, even though contractually I was entitled to this, unless I could really prove that this buyer was a buyer I had actually been showing houses to. Okay. In other words, I didn't need to get a windfall. If it was someone off the street or someone from an open house that didn't have an agent, then I'm happy with my 3% commission because that was really my expectation all along. We'll come back to this concept. Multiple listing service. Let's talk about that. Let's say a seller goes to sell their house. In the case where a seller wants an agent to sell it for them, they hire a listing agent. Pretty simple, huh? The listing agent, most of the time, will advertise the house on their local multiple listing service. The benefit of the multiple listing service, also known as the MLS, is that it's set up to have the most current information possible about all real estate sales and listings within the footprint of that MLS. How does it have the best information? Well, in return for exclusive access to this MLS database, all member agents are required to list or advertise their listings on the MLS. Okay, so there are some exceptions, but this is the basic quid pro quo. They're required to put all their stuff in there, therefore it has the best stuff. Information, that is. Incidentally, and in what would later come to haunt most MLSs around the country, is there's a field in the MLS where the listing agent could show the shared or co-op commission to be shared with the buyer's agent. Okay, remember that's the amount that the listing agent splits with the buyer's agent. Generally, that co-op in that field is going to say 3%. Okay, meaning as a buyer's agent, you could go in and see that they're going to share 3% with you. Okay, now for the part you may not know. We're going to come back to that co-op, by the way, because that's the whole basis for some recent huge litigation that happened that is kind of awakened buyers and sellers to things within this industry. But here's what you may not know. In the days past, real estate, and when I say days past, I mean pre-PC, pre-cell phone, pre-internet, real estate agency or representation, I don't mean an agency as in a company, I mean agency as in one party representing another, was very simple and one-sided. The seller hired and paid an agent to list, market, and sell their real estate. The commission amount paid to that listing agent has varied and actually gone up to, as far as I've heard, 7% of the contract price, and it's always been negotiable. Following were the basic steps of how it worked. The listing agent, and by the way, when I say in days past, consider this in the 70s, 1970s here in Georgia. Listing agent would list or advertise the property. Buyers would call or visit to express their interest. The listing agent would host those buyers for a tour of the home. If the buyer wanted to make an offer, the listing agent, the seller's agent, would place the proposed terms in a contract form and then present that to the seller. And remember, they had to use a form because most of the time, the listing agent is not an attorney and therefore cannot draft a contract. The listing agent represented the seller as a client. The listing agent, as I said, did not represent the buyer. The advent of the buyer's agent came about as real estate sales evolved, and I think it probably happened in the 80s, maybe the early 90s. Agents began exclusively representing buyers who really needed these agents because they had little or no access to any information about real estate that was for sale. They couldn't get a good view of the market, so they really did need an agent. who had access to all the information and could share that with them. So there's real value there. Before that, they kind of just had to see the real estate that was available on their Sunday drives. You remember Sunday drives, I'm assuming. This trend made total sense, the trend of the buyer's agent, that is. What did not make any sense was that the seller continued to be the only party traditionally paying a commission in the transaction. This was because of the law of agency in Georgia. Remember, we're talking the law of who represents who, okay? It had yet to catch up with the trend of buyer representation. And the buyer's agency was yet to be truly recognized as a type of agency by the law in the state of Georgia. To allow buyers to be represented by agents and for those buyer's agents to get paid a commission, a workaround was adopted in custom that comported with the Georgia law of agency. This workaround, you're going to hear me refer to that again, had the seller paying the whole commission to the listing agent, and then the buyer and listing agent would agree between themselves how to split the commission, as we talked about before. And then, in our current MLS structure, that co-op commission, or the amount that they agreed to share, would be put into the MLS so that buyer's agents could see it. Let's talk a little bit more about how buyer's agents used to represent their clients. Buyer's agent would load their clients up in the car and drive around and look at neighborhoods and homes. Showings were then scheduled. The new listings were released by the MLS in books on a weekly basis or sheets. And these books or sheets would physically be delivered to the brokerage houses. And when they were delivered to the brokerage houses, the agents would all pore over them because that was their internet. That was their ability to see what had listed, what's going on under contract, what's closed, and they would gobble it up because their clients, especially on the buy side, were dying to know what has just been listed, what has just sold, what's not on the market anymore. So it was inefficient, but it worked. So back then, the buyer's agent had exclusive access to that information, and so their presence in the transaction was extremely valuable. Then comes the internet. So as we all know, with the advent of Zillow, Realtor.com, Redfin, etc., buyers can and do shop for their homes online from their computer or smartphone. Buyers can easily study comparable sales and get a real feel for a neighborhood, what homes in a neighborhood are worth. They can see trends. They can get really fantastic graphically presented information on the market. The main service that buyers currently rely on their agents for are really the tasks relating to the form contract for the purchase of real estate. Under the current workaround on a commission that we talked about above, buyers think, well, since the seller's paying my agent, why not use a buyer's agent? It's free, right? Well, technically it is, but the seller is paying both sides of the commission, and we all know that the total commission cost for the buyer's agent and the seller's agent is baked into the listing price. Sellers are smart. They know what they're going to net and they know what their cost is. So if it's 6%, you can be assured that the price that they're going to be willing to negotiate to is 6% higher than what it otherwise would have been. So the buyer ends up really paying their agent's commission, even though structurally it doesn't work that way currently. Most agents are not attorneys. So how did we in the 70s set up a system where they could be out drafting, preparing contracts without being a lawyer? Forms. That simple. So forms were created originally, and I believe, I'm not sure about this, but I believe a local firm hired a law firm to develop a small suite of forms for their agents to fill out the blanks, handwritten. That eventually in the 90s was taken over by the Georgia Association of Realtors, and they created a huge suite of contract forms. And that suite of forms has grown every year, twice a year actually. And it's grown because it has to protect agents from the unauthorized practice of law. Okay, so these forms have evolved and grown, but mainly they've grown to protect agents, to protect their commissions, to protect them from the unauthorized practice of law. And in my personal opinion, the forms are not as suitable for the principals to the transaction, meaning the buyer and the seller, than they could be and that they should be. And furthermore, no form can address all of the things that may need to be in a contract. There's myriad issues that arise with every contract. So the way the forms accommodated that is there's a section in the forms that's called special stipulations. In the special stipulation section, agents are invited to essentially draft clauses to the contract and to address things that may not be adequately handled by the form. But you're saying to yourself, wait a minute, isn't that the unauthorized practice of law? Well, let's just say that special stipulations should only be drafted by a licensed and experienced attorney. So because the suite of forms were created for agent, the evolution and regular revision of these forms has largely existed to create protections for real estate agents and brokerages. I've said that many times at the expense of buyers and sellers. Currently, most buyers allow themselves to be blindly herded through the transactions using these forms. Some don't even read them. Confusion, misunderstanding, and disputes are rampant. It cannot be disputed that buyers will benefit from the experienced legal representation in the drafting, negotiating, and administration of their binding contracts to purchase real estate. So if this workaround has been in place and working well for 40 or more years, why are we talking about it? Let's talk about the NAR litigation real quick. National Association of Realtors, also known as NAR. There was a huge lawsuit recently. Okay, and I'm going to just tell you a little bit about it because it has awakened buyers and sellers to a lot of things that are really awkward about how they buy and sell real estate. The NAR litigation revolves around antitrust claims related to real estate agent commissions, specifically how those commissions are handled within the multiple listing service, the MLS. Remember that portion where I said the co-op commission can be shown in the MLS? That's really the crux of what happened here. The lawsuits allege that the National Association of Realtors and various real estate brokerages, some of the biggest ones nationally, conspired to inflate and maintain high commission rates. The central point of their contention was that the NAR's cooperative compensation rule, the co-op thing that said 3%, which traditionally led to sellers' agents offering compensation to buyers' agents on the MLS. Okay. In doing so, this restricted the negotiability of the buyer's agent split because it was shown as 3% in the MLS. If a seller required the listing agent to put a 2, a 1, or God forbid a 0 in that field, the seller's fear is that the buyer's agents would be hesitant to show or recommend the seller's house, hence stifling the listing effort. People aren't looking at it. They're not being told about it. A point of note here, it is technically a violation of the Realtor's Code of Ethics not to show a house to their buyer that works for the buyer just because the buyer's agent's going to get paid less. That's an ethical violation. That being said, all agents are human, and it's not an ethics violation to tell your client that the seller is offering less or no commission. You obviously would tell them if you were an agent. Buyers generally like their agents a lot and want them to get paid more, especially if the buyer's not paying the commission, at least technically. So this litigation was settled. The settlement involves a big financial payout, which is really not important, but the key change is that the offers of buyer's agent compensation will no longer be allowed to be on the MLS platform. That little field where the 3% co-op is there is gone, okay? It also requires written agreements with buyers before touring homes, although they needed that anyway prior to that. Now it's become really serious. The settlement aims to make the commission negotiations more transparent for home buyers and sellers. There's a greater emphasis on written agreements. We talked about that, and the commissions are negotiable. The NAR has agreed to the huge financial settlement, which is important, obviously, the people who are paying it, but it's not important for you. It is going to reshape how the real estate agent commissions are handled, potentially leading to greater competition and transparency in the market. In particular, sellers have been awakened to the misalignment of representation and compensation. They now all know how it works, and it doesn't make sense to them. They've also been awakened to the fact that commissions are negotiable. They've always been negotiable, but nobody thought about it. Everybody kind of said the way they're doing it's 3 to the listing agent, 3 to the buyer's agent. So most recently, I've been a closing attorney, and so I've talked to lots of real estate agents and lots of sellers and buyers. Sellers have said to me, why am I paying the whole 6% when half of it's going to someone that doesn't represent me? Great question. Sellers are also saying, why doesn't the buyer just pay their agent? Because 6% is a lot of money. Great question. Buyers are saying, I'm not used to paying my agent's commission and I don't want to do it because 3% is a lot of money. It's also a good point. But one thing that I've heard buyers say a lot that has led me to the current business that I'm pursuing is they've said, well, I found my house online. Can't I just get an experienced real estate attorney to draft, negotiate, and administer my contract to purchase and not have an agent? And in doing so, can't I save up to 3% because the seller might be more negotiable if they know they don't have to pay that amount? The answer is yes. So for that reason, Agent Free was created. The website is www.goagentfree.ai. What Agent Free is, they help buyers who find their homes online who want to save up to 3% on the purchase price of the home by avoiding the buyer's real estate commission because they don't want or need to use a buyer's real estate agent, and they're fine doing their own due diligence. And they also really value being represented in the negotiations and in the drafting of their buyer's contract by an experienced real estate attorney. So Agent Free matches buyers who found their homes online, we just discussed, with their own personal real estate attorney who drafts their own personalized, buyer-centric custom contract. No forms, no agent forms. Who might be a client of Agent Free? And by the way, my law firm, the residential real estate law firm, is an attorney partner of Agent Free. Any buyer who has not signed anything or agreed to anything with a real estate agent, any buyer who wants to save money in a non-arm's length transaction, i.e. intra-family transactions, neighbor to neighbor, friend to friend, renter wanting to buy the house that they've been renting, or buyers who just don't want their personal information shared outside of their attorney or lender, buyers who don't want to be forced to use contract forms. These are all buyers who are gravitating to the Agent Free concept, and I'm representing now as their attorney. Some have told me they are excited to have an experienced real estate attorney with superior contract knowledge and negotiation skills. So, as I've told you in the last 5 years of me being a practicing closing attorney, I've had lots of people say, found my house online. Can you just draft me a contract? Can we just do the transaction? And, I've done it most of the time, but my focus has been on closings. So now I have broken off from the firm and I've started my own firm just to represent buyers and soon sellers in the drafting and negotiation of their contracts. And I work with them all the way through getting it under contract and up until closing. I don't do closings anymore, but I'm also always happy to recommend the firm I used to work for to do closings because they're very, very good. And then I represent them as their attorney, and I draft a contract as their advocate, and I negotiate it as their attorney. Okay, so what does all this mean to the agent community? Do they hate us now? No, they don't. Okay, I've talked to many of my former agent friends. The good agents all know that approximately 90% of buyers and sellers will still use agents, 90%, because they need them and they're willing to pay for them. It's the other 10% of buyers and sellers who need and want representation by an experienced real estate attorney. That number may go up. In fact, I think it will. Okay, that 10% will go up. But like I've said, we're not trying to replace real estate agents because I don't act as a real estate agent in these transactions. I'm the attorney. I don't go do their due diligence for them. I don't go open the doors. They'll use a showing service to get in if they want to do that. Okay. Good agents also know that experienced agents and agents who have progressed in their career generally list properties more than they represent buyers for reasons we've talked about before. Furthermore, good agents also know that my law firm, since we're not acting as a real estate agent, is an incredible referral resource. Meaning, if someone gets into my system and I'm representing them as their attorney, and it becomes obvious that they really do need a real estate agent, I'm going to refer them out because I'm not going to act like a real estate agent. So the good agents that I've talked to have said, I think your concept is wise and smart, and I hope you'll refer me some business. So if you're interested in learning more about this concept, you can email me. I'll put all that stuff down in the description below. But really all you got to do is go to www.goagentfree.ai and it'll tell you more about it. And if you're interested in getting started, click Get Started. I look forward to hearing from you. Well, anyway, I hope this was useful for you. I hope that you'll click that you like it and maybe even subscribe to my channel because there's going to be more of this coming. And I love talking about real estate, and I found that most people I talk to love talking about it too. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope to see you on the next podcast. Thanks very much.